Hello, good evening, everyone, or good evening, or good late afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Wednesday Night Live from Courtroom Confidential, the fastest growing true crime news channel on YouTube. Guys, thank you so much. It was a very jam-packed day today. Bryan Kohberger was in court. Lori Vallow was in court. Lots of fireworks going on in that case. A lot of cases for us to jump into. A lot of familiar names. Hello, Holly. So good to see you. And Shell and Andrew C. and Seeking Justice and B. Michigan. All these familiar names. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm going to get jumping into it right away because we have a very special guest that I'm very excited about. And the first thing up that we're going to talk about, hello, Afton, is Lori Vallow, because her case started. We've had opening statements, we've had witnesses, and we've had already some spiciness in court, I think is the best way to do it. So I'm so glad that Linda is here to talk to us about it, because talking to her beforehand, I could tell she is loving every minute of this. So we're going to talk about Lori Vallow. This is Linda from It's a Crime. You guys are going to love chatting with her about Lori Vallow. She's been following that case for a very long time. And then for our poll for the cases, when we have time towards the end of the show, whatever we're left with, we can talk about Bryan Kohberger, Ingolf, Tuerk, who had closing arguments today, and they are deliberating, and Sementilli, who's also deliberating. So we can talk about the conclusion of both of those very big cases that I know you have all been following. And then, of course, as always, stay to the very end because we have some fun announcements for all of you. So please, do our obeisance, sacrifice to the algorithm gods. If you haven't already, please like this, please subscribe. But without any further delay, everybody, please welcome Linda from It's a Crime. Hey, how are you?
Hi, how are you, Josh? Thank you for having me on. Hi, everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've been looking forward to this because we talked earlier in the week, and we talked about your passion for following the Lori Vallow case and how long you've put into it and how many hours, I didn't realize, you have dedicated on nearly a daily basis to researching this case and following it and really staying on top of it. And I know that you have been watching it on your channel every single minute of it so far, right?
Yeah. Yes. I've been streaming on it. We've been diving in.
I love it. And there's a lot to talk about today. And I don't want to be such a tease about it, but I want to save that for a second because we have not talked about it on this channel since it started. We've talked a lot about the lead up to it, but I wanted to talk a little bit about opening statements because there was so much going into this case, so much speculation as to how much of a train wreck would Lori Vallow be, and when would the explosions take place? When would the wheels come off, type of a thing? And people were expecting from the onset she wouldn't be able to control herself. I was even talking with some folks too that perhaps this would be a moment for her because she still, in my view at least, very much believes in these kind of fringe religious beliefs of hers. I thought this might be a moment for her to use this whole forum as like a pulpit or something. But she jumped into, and I don't want to kind of take this away from your opinion, but I felt like she jumped into opening statements as you might expect an attorney to handle them. I mean, it seemed to me like if I did not know that was the defendant, I would have thought, okay, that's just the defense's opening statements. Like she was saying kind of all the things you would expect out of an attorney's mouth. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, to an extent, the first part is the evidence will show, the evidence will show, the evidence will show. So she's obviously done some homework.
Right.
And
well, she's also been through a trial before, right?
She has,
very, very up close.
However, yeah, it's true. It's true. But she's already starting to crumble, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We're seeing day by day. I did say this on my channel that you'll see Lori come out, and I think over time she'll start to lose it.
Yeah.
And she can only hold her emotions for so far. She's already being quite spicy, like we were saying. But yeah, I see her coming out of the gate going, oh, she looks prepared. She's asking these questions. But as the days go on, we're only on day 3. and she's already
She's
starting to.
she's already starting to take it personal. Like
Yeah.
she doesn't have that arm's length kind of reserve that an attorney would have, because it's very, it's very much about her, but she's also making it very much about her. But what is her theory of this case from the opening statements? What is going to be her defense?
From her opening statements, Lori says that self-defense is not a crime. It's a family tragedy and not a crime. And that's basically bottom line on day one.
And this is what's interesting about that to me is I actually think that is obviously the strongest part of the defense case. And it's funny to me. I guess I just did not give her enough credit for even being able to recognize that being the strongest part of the case. Because I'll give an opinion here that's probably going to get me chopped up by everybody. But I don't think I think it's a mistake. Maybe this is the better way to put it. I think it's a mistake to view this as an absolute slam dunk for the prosecution. And the reason for that is the prosecution has a couple of hurdles here. First of all, they have to prove a conspiracy, right? Which shows an agreement that took place ahead of time. And I know that there's a lot of text messages and there's a lot of kind of scheming and planning and everything else, which I think in the hands of a skilled defense attorney, you might be able to say that's just people talking about her feelings and her religious beliefs and everything else, but not necessarily talking about murder. But none of that matters if it wasn't a murder to begin with. And so focusing on the idea that this was self-defense, if the state can't prove it was a murder, then you can't conspire
Right.
for anything, right? You know what I mean? Like you can only conspire
no
if it's a crime. Right. So it doesn't matter if she planned or conspired or did whatever else. If they don't consider that to be a murder to begin with, then the whole game is over. So it's interesting that she focuses on that as well.
Well, and you can see that because in the beginning, she's focusing and her questions, you're starting to see where she's running with it because in day two, I believe it might even run into this morning. These days are kind of melting together.
Right.
She's talking about the trajectory of Charles being shot. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself right now, but
no, please.
She's talking about the trajectory and Charles being shot because the second shot was shown to have been he was shot while he was lying down. And she's trying to talk today. She talked at length about him wearing a $200 bamboo shirt and if there's actually holes in the shirt once he got shot. But also talked about the indent on the floor from the exit wound. So we're starting to see her trying to really push for, and I think she had something to say about the trajectory, and she said it's not relevant or something like that earlier. I can't remember if it was day 2 or 3. But yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because there's a part of me, and listen, I am no Lori Vallow fan here, and the woman is obviously to a a degrees of evil that we can't even really comprehend.
Yes.
To have been involved in the murders of her own children. But from a purely trying to view this objectively as an attorney's perspective, it is frustrating because you can see kind of the point she's trying to make, but she's not skilled enough or conversant enough in the technology, the terms to talk about it. Like I heard her with one of the investigators trying to get into the idea of stippling. And
Yes.
what would that say about the distance that someone would be away from someone else during firing a shot? And like you talked about trajectory and, position of shooter and things like that. All excellent points if you're discussing a self-defense case, but kind of executed poorly coming from an amateur, a person who's not an attorney and not skilled at doing this.
Well, and it's interesting too that she's even representing herself. And I think that says a lot about Lori. And and for her to, I mean, look, some questions are really good. Some questions are great. I think, in my opinion, that she's muddling it a lot because she's asking some really bizarre questions as well. Like, did you see the lady in the nightgown outside my house that day? And it's that's my own opinion. I'd love to hear what you think about it, because is that mucking it up for her? To me, it's like you're asking all these questions over and over, and then 10 questions that seem irrelevant, and it muddles it, I think, to the jurors. They're going, I don't get it. Why are we
Yeah.
3 hours on how long it takes? And you do hear some of the officers are getting annoyed with how long it took, or these irrelevant questions they feel. And you hear one of the officers look and was like, I don't know, my chocolate milk said it was about half. Like,
Yeah.
it was getting, 4 hours. It could have been 2 hours in questioning, not 4.
That's a really interesting point, is how much do the jurors pick up on the idea that she kind of doesn't know what she's doing? Because you have to kind of assume that maybe some of these jurors have never seen a trial, right? I mean, many people who get selected for jury service may have never even walked into a courtroom before in their entire life. So they've never seen a trial. So they don't really know what to expect at all. So they're coming from kind of a not our perspective. We watch these all day long, but a perspective of somebody who might never watch these things. Arizona Gal 89. Sorry, I just want to say that, says, hello from Arizona, Josh and fellow members. I absolutely love your channel. May justice be served in the Kohberger case. Thank you so much, Arizona Gal. And there's one other, Redondo. Thank you again. Cover Monica. I say the opportunity to cover the case that not anybody else is. She's voting on one of our cases, Monica Sementilli. We'll see how it turns out, Redondo. Anyhow, thank you guys for that. And thank you, Laura. So if these jurors have never seen a trial before in their lives, I still have to imagine, though, that they understand the defendant representing themselves is abnormal and not something that that is to be expected. And so I wonder if they are already kind of tuned into the idea that this person doesn't quite know what they're doing. So when she starts to not know, starts to display that she doesn't know what she's doing, if that might bother them more. Whereas if it were an attorney who's just kind of carrying on with different weird questions, they might just go, well, I don't know where this guy is going. But when it's the defense, the defendant themselves, maybe they're thinking, well, she obviously doesn't even know how to handle this case because she's not an attorney. Do you think any of that could be playing a role?
I think so. I think you make a really good point that jurors, some of them have never been in the courtroom before. So perhaps they're looking at Lori going, oh man, this is crazy that she's representing herself and she's making these points. She's doing a really good job. But there's another part of this. And the other part is her behavior and her disrespect towards the judge.
Yeah.
And her disrespect towards the witnesses. The judge it's actually quite a bit towards the judge. And I find she's very disrespectful, but also to the witnesses. I mean, you have somebody going, oh, okay, then. So no. Oh, okay, so yes. And just snarky. And then even to the judge saying, I got it, Your Honor, or sure. And so that has to be, even from a jury's point of view, to watch her go, wow, she's like, that's disrespectful.
Yeah. There's kind of a narcissism that oozes from her. Yeah.
Yeah. Lori. Yeah, 100%. I think that's why Lori is representing herself, in my opinion. It's just like, well, move over. If I want to get it done right, I'm going to do it.
Yeah. And the judge had to chastise the judge. By the way, this guy deserves a sainthood for the way he's been handling this. I think he's been amazing and incredibly patient. And he's, this is a nightmare for everybody involved. But he had to chastise her, and I think in the mildest of ways too. But he had to basically tell her, you are wrapping up. She's doing what we call they're called, like, I forget the term, wraparound questions. And I used to love doing this as a prosecutor, where you take the person's answer and you include that in your next question. So they say, where did you go next? I walked over to the door and I opened up the door, and you go, okay, so you walked to the door, you opened up the door, and what did you find after, and you kind of can include there, but then she adds stuff to it that is that's kind of commentary. She'll say, you walk to the door and open the door, but that wasn't in the police report, but that's fine. Did you then go, and she'll add these little commentaries on top of it. And the judge was like, no more of that.
Yeah, that was yesterday that he said no more, because he was saying, that's a form of testimony. You got to stop doing it. She'd say, that's fair. Okay. But then there's a little bit of snark. Of course, a lot of snark, even just in Today with Nancy Joe. And whenever you want to talk about that,
yeah.
Say, oh, I'm sure you don't. Oh, interesting. And the judge is saying, you got to cut that off. But she's been doing that with every single witness.
Yeah.
She got the warning yesterday. She said, I won't do it again. And then all day again today, she was doing it. So,
well, she can't help herself. I mean, that's the one thing we know. This is a person who, this is putting it mildly, suffers from impulse control. And she obviously cannot control herself, and I imagine the judge's incredible patience is going to run thin. But let's not torture ourselves or anybody listening any longer and get into Nancy Joe Hancock, because this was even Tiffany, running around the house with her headphones on, listening to this during the day while she's chasing 3 little kids around, comes up to me and goes, oh my God, you're not going to believe what's going on. So set this up for us. Who is this this lady, and what happened during court?
All right. So Nancy Joe Hancock went on a date with Charles Vallow, Lori's 4th husband, and the man murdered. And this is why we're here. So Nancy Joe met Charles on a dating app. She met him around July 3rd, just 8 days before Charles was killed.
So not like a long-standing relationship by a long shot. Okay.
No, but there was connection there. They were texting back and forth a lot. They were chatting. They didn't meet until July 10th in person. And they seem to talk a lot about Lori, a lot about the relationship. She knew that Lori and Charles were going through a divorce, that there was an insurance policy, that he had changed it to his sister's name instead, for the beneficiary instead of Lori. And so they end up meeting on July 10th. And on July 10th, which is the day before, Charles came into town. He wanted to go see JJ the next morning, pick him up, take him to school. But his plane came in late on the 10th, and then they met up. They spent several hours going to the keg, having a chit chat. And I said earlier in my channel that it sounded like a pretty darn good date. He took her out for dinner. They chatted. They closed the restaurant down. They ended up talking for another 45 minutes in the parking lot. And I've been in the dating pool for a couple years now. And I said, you know what? That's a pretty good sign if a man is taking you out for dinner and then 45 minutes again. So it seemed like they had a pretty
kicking it off.
They were, yes. And she did get emotional a little bit. Nancy Joe did on the stand, talking about how excited Charles was to go see JJ the next morning. So we saw her a little bit in tears as well.
What was the prosecution's purpose for calling her? Because she's not percipient to anything that took place. She wasn't there when the shooting took place. She didn't know him for all that long. Was it just to kind of like set up the people who interacted with him in those final moments?
Well, that's a good question, Josh. Maybe you could answer that for me.
Oh, yeah.
But I do know that Nancy Joe phoned when she found out that that was Charles who was killed. She saw it on the news months later and phoned the authorities and said, hey, I went on a date with Charles. I know that he changed the policy. I know the things that was going on.
Oh, interesting.
In this, in the relationship, and so quickly.
Did she get into if he explained to her why he changed the policy? Because that's a big point for the prosecution's theory of motive, is that this was a large part about money, and she wanted that policy. Did he explain to Nancy Joe why he changed the policy?
They didn't get into too many details, which was interesting. She just said that she knew how much it was for $1 million, and she wanted to say a few things, but she said something like, with the situation going on or something like that. So
Yeah.
there wasn't really a lot of conversation that I remember about that.
Huh.
They didn't get into it, other than Charles told me quite a bit about what's been going on. And then Lori came in and asked.
And I want to get into Lori, because
Yeah.
that's where things really caught fire. But
Yeah.
I have a thought and then a theory, and the theory's fairly wild. My thought is, first of all, I think it's always smart for the prosecution in telling a story to add some, characters, or, surrounding characters that might not entirely be moving the whole narrative forward, but they add color and perspective for the jurors. So calling someone that knew him, she saw him the day before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is somebody who, probably one of the last people to see him alive, could talk about his demeanor, could talk about what he was going through, all of those types of things. An impartial person, by the way, which is always nice. It's not like she's got some sort of dog in the fight here. She's just someone who had barely met him over a week earlier, and give that perspective to the. So there might not be like a purpose for calling her, but just to kind of add color to the story. But I'm wondering, as you're speaking, do you think that perhaps this was to try to see if they couldn't bait Lori to start to lose it a little bit, like knowing this person's going to get under her skin just merely because of who she was? Do they think, let's throw her on there and see if this gets to her?
You know what? It could be. It was so good.
Yeah.
And interestingly though, the day before, when they were having the fire chiefs on and the police officers, what we saw was interesting in Lori's behavior, because what I saw was Lori knows who she can manipulate and who she can't. And when the fire chief came on, I just said, no way is she going to get in detail of these questions, because he just commands respect by just sitting. It's just, he was a no BS guy, and she wouldn't be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I know that, and the others who are knee deep in the whole case and trying to figure that out, that may perhaps be like, let's put her on and see what Lori's going to do. And we did see that today.
Yeah.
We saw right away there was this through it, and
tension.
Oh yeah, snark up, yeah, everywhere.
Before we get into it, you just made me think of something else though. I heard another outlet describe her as almost kind of putting on like a little bit of a persona with some of the witnesses, where she gets like almost like flirtatious or something.
100%
talk to us about that. What is that all about?
We've seen her flirt and giggle, and this is more of what I was saying, that she knew not to pull these antics on the chief, the fire chief. But you could see some of them, she goes, I didn't know, like that kind of thing. And
Wow.
her octaves of her voice go higher and higher and higher. So this morning, she came out talking faster than normal and really, really high. And that's Lori. I mean, over the years, we've seen her in her other trial, in court hearings. She smirks, she giggles, she laughs. It is literally short of, and I speak to this on my channel, you'd think she was doing like, elbow, wrist, wrist in the court. It's that extreme. We don't get to see that in this trial, because you don't get to see, much of her face, but she literally is smirking, laughing, giggling, flirting. And I found it interesting with the jurors that there were in the beginning 13 men and 3 women, because I automatically think Lori's going to think this is just the best thing ever, to be able to
charm the men.
100%.
Wow. Yeah, that's all part of her narcissism. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, but to me, that's all part of her narcissism, is that she feels like she feels that she's one of the most charming and intelligent people on earth, and
Yes.
that's how she's going to just get move through this entire trial. She's going to just put me up there. I'm smarter than any attorney, and I will charm everyone and explain this and show how stupid the police are and the prosecutor is, and I'll walk out of there. I truly believe that's what she thinks in her head.
Yeah, and you can hear it.
Yeah, and it's not just in her brain, it's manifesting itself in the way that she talks to people and the tone of her voice.
100%. And that's where you get that. So yes, then. So no, then. Okay. That kind of, that so, you can tell.
Talk to us about her cross of Nancy Jo, because it was
so good. it was so good, and only because this is more of the behavior breakdown. Nancy Jo gets on the stand. She starts talking, says, I met Charles on this, and she gets up there right away. And she was talking about, oh, so you date married men then?
I love that.
And
I love that. Like she's the appalling one in the room, right? Like she's the one that everybody should be offended by in the room.
Right. Meanwhile, and for those who are watching right now, they really don't know what's going on. 9 months before is when Lori started the affair on Charles.
Right.
So this had been going on for 9 months, off and on. Charles says, hey, I want to get a divorce, blah, blah, blah. So now Lori, who's the adulteress, is looking at Nancy Jo like she's the biggest, temptress and other woman, and says, well, oh, do you always date married men? Are you on the app? And this kind of thing. And so then they got into talking about, well, what did you guys talk about on these dates? And Lori says, so you talked about me the whole time then? And it was beautiful because Nancy Jo goes, don't flatter yourself. It wasn't the whole time. It was so good. It was so good. I love that she
had her moment. Got that blow in, got that swing in.
It was so good. And I was secretly, hoping that Nancy Jo would have said, I don't know, you should know.
Right.
You're the one who cheated on, I was hoping on that, but
I mean, good for her, right? This poor woman, just living her life, trying to find love, dates a man for a few days, and then before you know it, now she's roped into this crazy, chaotic case with this absolute sociopath of a human being who's killed her children, killed her new husband's wife, cheated, all of this other nonsense. And now here she is, finds herself several years later testifying in front of the world. It's like this poor person, the only mistake she ever made in life was answering some request on a dating website, and now she finds herself in this whole mess, and she rose to the occasion and handled herself admirably.
100%. And I think there was a connection from the sounds of it, that she was really looking forward to seeing him again. She did say at the end, like, oh no, maybe I would see him, I had a problem that he wasn't fully divorced or whatever. But I think that would have affected her. The way she was talking, she had empathy. She was upset about JJ, just from, Charles. And obviously she knows what happened now. Also, on the flip side, think of it, the next day she's waking up thinking, I had this wonderful, beautiful date with such a nice, charming, kind man. She said that she was so impressed with his kindness and how he even treats Lori. In her perspective. But she wakes up the next morning thinking this guy's ghosted her, like, oh, wow. I haven't heard from him. Like, what's going on? I'm trying calling, what's going on? And then she finds out months later that this all happens.
Yeah. And towards the end of this questioning, she asks it, and this is again kind of reveals her lack of trial experience and lack of just kind of the understanding of strategy and questioning. And I think this was a moment where it had become so personal to her that she just wanted the answers to these questions, even if they may have been hurtful to her case. When she asks, what all did he say? And the judge actually interrupts at that point, right?
Yes.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, he said, are you sure you want to go down this basically rabbit hole? It's because that could open a lot for you. No, I want to know. But then we didn't hear anything after that.
So when he admonished her on that, he excused the jury.
Yeah.
And they weren't in the room when they were having this discussion. She kind of dug her heels in, and then when they brought the jury back in is when she kind of avoided that question. Perhaps she spoke with her advisory council or something like that, and they were like, you don't want to open this door.
Yeah. And it's too bad, because I was secretly hoping again. That's like, well, Lori wants that. Let's hear it. Let's see what's going to be said about it. But we heard a couple things even with Lori, like you were saying, that is starting to get personal. And when Nancy Jo was talking about JJ again and how much Charles loved him and that he was so excited, she stopped. She said, thank you, that's enough. And she stopped. She interrupted Nancy Jo. Thank you, that's enough. She didn't want her to say anymore, and that's her direct quote. And then also trying to get her to perjure. Well, she said, do you know what perjury is?
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a couple spots. The personal issues is just going to get worse. This is what I believe. As more witnesses come in, and the more it gets to that 6 weeks, or at this point, it's going to take 6 months with the amount of questions Lori has, that she's going to get worse in her behavior. This is just the beginning. I think it's going to go that way, not that way.
Yeah, I just the exhaustion of all of it too. I mean, being in trial when you know what you're doing is an exhausting affair, and your emotions can get away from you. She's barely clinging to appropriate behavior as it is. How do you think the prosecution's handling her? Because I know the prosecution has been objecting, and the objections are usually getting sustained because they are proper objections. Do you think, though? And this was always a problem when I handled a couple of cases with pro per defendants as a prosecutor. You don't want to look like you're beating up on them, though, either. Right. You don't want to send the impression to the jury that you and the judge are ganging up on this poor defendant trying to just fight for their life. How do you think that's all playing out?
Oh, I think she's actually reserved. I feel like maybe she's a little bit more reserved. I don't know. I think today she's starting to get annoyed already. We're on day 3 for the prosecution, and rightly so. I mean, some of the things are redundant. Lori's asking questions and then she's going through it all over again. So I think it's appropriate with the prosecution, but I'm surprised maybe just a little bit that she wouldn't have been a little more aggressive. But like you said, I guess it can't look like they're ganging up.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, with these kind of wild card attorneys or defendants, you kind of let them go, because who knows what wild, awesome stuff you might get out of it by just letting the thing play itself out,
Agree. I think that's good too.
Do you think she's scoring any points? Has there ever been a point during the case where you thought, actually, that was a pretty good point she just made, or that was a pretty good question she just asked?
Yeah, I think like I said earlier, there are some good questions that she's asking. One of the things I believe she's more manipulating the jury is my husband, and not Charles. It's always my husband, which is interesting because she has another husband, number 5, Chad Daybell.
Right.
So she uses that a lot. I think more so to manipulate than maybe the smart questions.
And that'll begin to wear thin on jurors, I think. Let's answer a couple of these questions if you're okay with it, if you still got some time with us.
Yeah, I was gonna say one thing, Josh. I said I was hoping that maybe Nancy Jo would have said, oh, your husband, you mean Chad? I know she couldn't, but you really secretly wanted to say husband.
Right. JC Broadway says, do you think the jurors really don't know about the murders of her children?
Well, technically they shouldn't.
Right. Do you, I mean, nothing has happened, I guess, in trial
Mm,
so far that has even alluded to the idea that something nefarious took place with the kids.
no, other than they're talking, Lori was saying a family um tragedy, or yeah, family tragedy is not a crime. I don't think at any point have we heard that anything about the children. But and I think that's what Nancy Joe was biting her lip today too, is like, with the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Here, let me see if we
But
got some.
one of the commenters too in my chat said, I wonder if somebody was secretly still, even though they're not supposed to, that they secretly would look it up.
Oh, I mean, people are people, right?
Right.
And I think you just, we put a lot of faith in people not doing that, but I think that a lot of times we get disappointed and people do look things up. They just can't help themselves, and they figure they're at home and nobody knows. What does it matter if I
Yeah.
look it up? And it's not going to take a whole bunch of Googling. You're not going to have to do
Oh,
a whole bunch of digging to find out what Lori Vallow's been up to.
I think you just said, if you just put Lori Vallow or Lori Daybell, you'll know all of it. And yeah,
Yeah.
it takes 2 seconds.
My second smile, thank you so much, says, do we know if Colby will be called as a witness yet? I heard him say to Nate he will probably attend court one day, but can't remember if he's been subpoenaed. Do we know?
I don't know.
Haven't heard about that yet. Okay. Let me see. There was another question here that I thought was really interesting to me. Oh, Afton says, what remedy does the court have if she continues to make snarky comments? And I can answer that, but I'm also curious, has the judge threatened anything at this point?
No, but the only thing that I've seen him today start to get a little bit annoyed, because she was asking Nancy Joe about, I think it was Nancy Joe. No, it was another witness, like, oh, do you know that they play golf together? And just weird questions. And you could see the judge go, I guess you can answer the question if they played golf or not, that kind of thing. But I haven't seen him say, like, smarten up, or I, I don't even, I haven't
Colby
seen
has not
any of
been
it.
subpoenaed. Okay, thank you
There
for
you
that,
go.
Kathy.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything like it, but to be honest, even in her other trial, some of her behavior was truly up here, and she never was told to, you know, keep composure. I'm in Canada. I've been in
Yeah,
court before. I've seen even just a judge look and was like, there's no crying in court, period. Like,
yeah,
nothing.
yeah.
And so it's very different to watch Lori compared to in Canada or where I'm at. I've never seen it.
I will say this, that, like I said before, this is such a difficult position for the judge in particular to be in, because the last thing the judge wants to do is do something that will create an appealable issue later on. So if he comes down on her too hard, prevents her from asking certain types of questions, does somehow sanction her, any of these types of things, then it might create some sort of appealable issue, because they're going to say the judge didn't allow me the opportunity to put on a defense. And so
Right.
that's why in a lot of these pro per cases, you see these defendants and it just seems like they're running wild all over the courtroom, but it's like the judge is just doing their best to get this rickety truck across the finish line, so that they
Yeah.
can be done with it. We saw that, and I'm blanking. Please tell me, guys, the name of the case with the Christmas Day parade where he represented himself. I'm blanking on this. Why? Hold on, somebody's going to tell me. And he represented himself pro per, and it was an absolute mess through Daryl Brooks. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, others were talking
Aylin.
about that.
Yeah, Daryl Brooks' case, it was just every single day. There now, everybody's giving me answers. There you go. Thank you, Pamela. Thank you, Texas mom. Every single day it was just like something new with this guy, and she would, to the point that she was putting him in another room to watch some of the court. constantly kind of admonishing him, but also being incredibly patient and never kind of fully removing him from the trial. And I think that that's probably as far as she'll be able to take it in this case. Is I don't think the judge wants to risk creating some sort of an appellate issue by shutting down what she's doing. But she's being snarky, but it doesn't look like she's being nearly as bad as what we have seen in that other case.
So question then, at what point, because it makes sense that he has to be fair, he has to be impartial. I get all that. But what point is that where it's like, now I got to shut it down?
I think it's at the point where it looks like the defendant might be trying to create a mistrial. So if she starts and she's getting cute with it, but she's not getting close enough. But if she starts to say things like, inadmissible evidence, things that have been litigated and they can't come in, and she starts to just kind of mention those, or starts to, I don't know, bring up things that, I'm trying to think of a good example and nothing's coming to my head, but it would have to be something where it looks like she's intentionally trying to sabotage the case by saying something that she knows has been kept out in the hopes that then the judge will have to declare a mistrial. At that point, first of all, you can't earn your own mistrial. You can't create your own mistrial. So I don't think the judge would give it to her. But I think at that point, he might contemplate actually substituting in counsel. But I think she would have to really be pushing it. I mean, it would have to be after several times of admonishing her. And if she continued to do it, he probably would then just put in substitution, standby counsel, just to get them through the rest of the trial.
Well,
I don't think it's going to happen is my end result. I think we're going to see her finish this whole thing.
Well, and we're on day 3, so she's already getting spicy. So I'm sure, I think she said something maybe yesterday. There was something that she started on and answered. It was like something like she wasn't there, or she's starting to have these little sneaky questions in. I wish I would remember what it was, but there's a couple things where she'll go along and then she'll sneak something in there. But we'll see. We'll see what happens down the road, and when there's witnesses that she has that personal vendetta against.
Yeah.
We'll see what she tries to do.
I want to
get to perjury today too.
Yeah, that was another kind of snarky thing. But I think jurors are smart enough to see through a lot of that too. I don't think they fall for that stuff, especially when it's coming from a pro per defendant. Let's try to get to some of these answers or questions here, and then I'm going to try to get you out of here. Julie Clevelanger Denton, who is joining us from Facebook, thank you so much, says, based on her opening, I believe Lori's angle is the protection of Tylee. She has mentioned the bad relationship between Charles and Tylee. She's going for child abuse, in my humble opinion. I kind of think that too. Do you see her trying to make this into, it wasn't even so much of a self-defense as it was, they were all kind of defending themselves against Charles because he was so violent in that moment, and they were all, and her brother Cox was just a hero. Do you see her setting up the table for that?
I think Lori will point the finger at anybody she can. I think that long ago I did a Charles Vallow series and I talked about the discrepancies in it. And I don't know if she's necessarily protecting Tylee. The story was that Tylee was in there. There was an altercation with the bat with Alex Cox. Tylee was there and she fell, and a lot of discrepancies. For me, I think if you look at it, Lori was in the house that day. Alex Cox was in the house. Charles Vallow, Tylee Ryan, and JJ Vallow. The only one who lived is Lori. Is the only one. No one else can speak for themselves.
God.
So
what an incredible statement to make. Yeah. Yeah. The wake of dead bodies this woman has left in her
every
trail.
Single person. And then she comes back after knowing this man for 15 years and married for 13. And she's laughing on camera because in her mind, she thinks she's $1 million richer.
Yeah.
So
God,
as it goes to Tylee, I think she would choose anybody to go under the bus, this woman.
I think
She
you're right.
has no conscience. So I just, that's how I feel. And when you put it that way and you really look at there's nobody left, go, who's the common denominator?
Yeah. Yeah. Farm Girl says, where was it? Farm Girl gifted us a membership there, and I thank you so much, Farm Girl. But one last question here, and this is from Helen B. Says, wasn't asking Lori if she wanted to ask that question giving legal advice by the judge? That's an interesting question, Helen B. Is the judge interjecting at that point, maybe going too far in helping her? And I think you could argue, yeah, he's helping her. And that might be more of a problem if she were an attorney representing a client, because I know if I were the prosecutor and the judge interjected to stop a defense attorney from asking a question like that, I'd probably flip the table over going, let them make their own mistakes, please. But when it's the defendant representing themselves, I think what he didn't want to have happen is her to ask that question and then the answer to be given, and it does open this door and it opens up a whole floodgate, and now he's dealing with all sorts of perhaps appealable issues or mistrial issues and everything else. So I think he was just being prudent by making sure she didn't step into anything that she didn't entirely, if she had said, yeah, I do, if they had done that sidebar and said, yeah, I fully understand what you're saying, Judge, and I still want the answer, then have at it. This judge, one thing he's been very good at is he will let her make mistakes after he has fully advised her of the consequences. And then if she still wants to do it, have at it, lady.
Yeah. Yeah. He's been really good. He's been patient and he just answers it. I mean, like he should. There's one question today she said her objection was leading and it was like a yes or no. And she's like, that's leading. So I think he's getting annoyed at some things, but he does explain it to her. And that's it. This is what this is. We're moving forward.
Yeah. Well, it's been a wild ride. And like you said, it's 3 days in, and we've got, do they have an estimate as to how long they expect this to go?
Before it started, they said to May 9th. And at this rate, with how many questions she has, honestly, I think it's going to be later. I don't know.
God, that's going to be exhausting. I wish the best for you on this journey. Thank you so much, Linda, for everything. Everybody, please go check out It's a Crime if you haven't already. For everybody joining us from that channel, thank you guys so much. I appreciate the It's a Crime family for being here. Is there anything that you got coming up that you want to share with people so that they make sure to check out?
I am streaming every day the Lori Vallow Daybell trial, so you're welcome to come. I would love to also have you, Josh, on the channel.
Yeah,
we can figure that out.
Yeah.
At a time, I think everyone would love having you on, and we can talk about other cases. But for now, I'm head first in Lori Daybell. I have to see this to the end. I have to, and she does go on June 2nd for her ex nephew-in-law and conspiring to kill him. And I mean, he's still alive, but that's Brandon Boudreaux.
Incredible.
So so I'll be covering that every day, and I'm very grateful for you and asking me on here. It's been a great time, and yeah, I'd love to be here.
This has been an absolute pleasure, and I think we picked a great day to talk about it too. And so I'm so thankful that you were available, and thank you again. And I am happy to come on your channel whenever you like. And don't worry, I will be bugging you again to come back here.
Yeah, I would love to. I really would. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
All right. That was Linda from It's a Crime. That was fantastic. I'm so appreciative to her for taking the time. She's been following this case from the very beginning. And like you said, it's just one of those journey type cases where if you've been a part of it from day one, you cannot stop yourself from wanting to see this through to the very, very end. All right. Should we see who won the poll, Kaylin? This is where I make Kaylin nervous. And I start, everybody gets mad at me because they're like, you be nice to Kaylin. And then I start yelling at her to give me the poll results. And let's figure out what we're going to talk about here. I have my hope of what it is. 68% Bryan Kohberger. I am not shocked by that at all. And I'm glad that we're going to talk about Bryan Kohberger because there's a lot to talk about in this case because he had his hearing today, or it started today. It's actually going to continue on to tomorrow. And I want to give a quick plug about Bryan Kohberger. And on Monday, we released a special presentation of our case notes series that we do on this channel where we do a deep dive into these cases. And we did one on Bryan Kohberger. And I am so proud of the episode that we came out with. And I wanted to give a huge shout out to Kaylin for all the hard work that she did on that, because she really lost a lot of sleep making sure that it was absolutely perfect. And I'm very proud of it. So if you guys haven't seen it, please check it out. And part of it was an interview with Kevin Fixler from the Idaho Statesman, who has been following the Bryan Kohberger case from the very beginning. And Kevin is going to be on this channel next Wednesday at this same time for Wednesday Night Live to talk about the things that are happening today and tomorrow in that case. So we were going to have him tonight, but we thought we might not have all the answers to everything. So we're going to have him next week to talk about all of this. And he's excited about it. And if you watch that episode, you know how well he's been following this case. So, but this was a big hearing today because there have been just a flurry of motions in limine back and forth. And this is what it's like in the days leading up to a trial, is that you're just battling everything out because you want to create the landscape of the trial. What is this trial actually going to look like? And this is, honestly, folks, this is where good trial work, the best trial attorneys, this is where they earn their paycheck. It's in these motions in limine, creating, like I said, that framework, that landscape for the trial, and what is going to come in, what's not going to come in, what arguments are going to be made or what not. That these decisions can have huge effects on the trial. I don't care how good you are. I don't care how many Alan Jacksons you put together. If he doesn't have the tools, if he doesn't have the judgments in his favor to make the arguments in court, he's not going to be able to make them. So this is where the rubber really hits the road. So let's get into, and everything was not decided today, but we'll get into a lot of what was decided today. Yeah, I can't wait to read. Jennifer Greenough says, I can't wait to read the judges' opinions when they come out, and I completely agree. I want to hear them too. But he did make some judgments today. He did give some rulings, and it's interesting. You can see you were really starting to get an idea of where this judge is leaning, not on the case, but on his feelings about how this case should play out. And this is Judge Stephen Hippler. I think he's doing a fantastic job. That is apparently the view from the courtroom today, which I hope they do a better job when we actually have the trial of this case, because I can't stand those kind of overhead views. But anyhow, first thing that they talked about was the issue of Bryan Kohberger's diagnoses, or if I'm using the wrong term, forgive me, of autism, and what the defense was originally trying to bring this up as a reason to preclude him from being able to be even eligible for the death penalty. And that wasn't even really so much discussed today. Today, it was more about how could his either diagnosis of autism or characteristics manifesting that, displaying that, how he displays that in his behavior, whether or not that could be used by the prosecution, which was interesting to me. So first of all, as far as whether or not this will preclude him from being eligible for the death penalty, the judge has not ruled on the death penalty yet in this case, which is kind of astonishing to me, because you would think we would have that well established before now, but has not ruled on that yet. But I don't think that argument's going to fly as far as it actually making him ineligible, precluding the prosecution from seeking the death penalty. But it can be used as a factor of mitigation in the death penalty phase. So forgive me if you guys already know this, but just a quick kind of understanding of how these trials work out with a death penalty. I operate in California. I'm going to explain to you California, but this is usually how it goes in most states, and I think Idaho is one of them. But you have the trial is bifurcated. You have the guilt phase and you have the penalty phase. Same jury, but they're different phases. There is a opening, closing, and verdicts and everything else in both phases. The guilt phase is all about, did Bryan Kohberger commit this crime beyond a reasonable doubt? And it's nothing about who he really is, his background, how he grew up, whether or not he has autism, whether or not he's a good or bad person. None of that comes in. If they get to a guilty verdict, and in California, if they find a guilty verdict and what is called a special circumstance, meaning that this was a crime committed, multiple murders or lying in wait or for financial gain or all of these other types of factors, a murder committed in the course of a home burglary, all of those types of things can create a special circumstance making him eligible for the death penalty. So if we assume that we've gotten to that point and they found him guilty and they found that he's now eligible to even consider the death penalty, then we move to the penalty phase. And the question there is simply, is his punishment going to be the death penalty or is it going to be life without parole? And in that phase, it is an entirely different type of trial because the attention turns almost squarely on its head from not talking about who this person is, because we don't put people on trial for who they are. And then in the penalty phase, it becomes almost entirely about who they are. What other crimes have they committed in the past? What type of a person are they? Have they done anything redeeming in their lives? And the prosecution will put on factors in aggravation, and the defense will put on factors in mitigation. In California, I just wanted to print out. I printed out some of the jury instructions on some of these things that can be considered. And it's things like whether or not the defendant has engaged in violent criminal activity in the past. Whether or not the defendant has been convicted of prior felonies, whether or not the defendant was under the influence, whether or not the victim participated in the defendant's homicidal conduct or consented in some sort of way, as bizarre as that might be. All of these other types of factors, which are basically saying, what kind of a person is this? And is this a person who should be eligible or should be given the greatest penalty that we have in this country? So the defense, interestingly enough, said, we don't want the prosecution using his diagnosis or behavior with autism characteristics as an aggravating factor. And I don't think the prosecution would ever do that anyways. I mean, think about I can't wrap my head around what exactly they're trying to say with that they would say that somehow he's more culpable because he's been diagnosed with this. I mean, it's such a ridiculous kind of cold-hearted argument. I can't see the prosecution making that argument. But the judge did say, it will obviously be something that can be used in mitigation for the defense to say this might explain some of his behavior. This might explain some of his kind of disconnect with other people. But again, we're talking about such a savagely awful murder here. I don't think the defense is ever going to get up there and try to say that his autism played a role in that whole thing. Okay, so that was number one. That was kind of handled shortly. Then we got into this banned words argument, and the defense is funny in this case to me because they really are kind of litigating a lot of things that I don't know if they entirely need emotion. And this was one of them. So they don't want labels placed on Bryan Kohberger. They don't want testimony or argument to be made where they label him or call him a sociopath or a psychopath. And first of all, I don't know who would testify to that anyways. And it would be an objectionable label to place on a person anyways. There's no one that's going to testify to his psychological state and diagnose him with being a sociopath or a psychopath. if that were true, then we might be having a different conversation. But just the idea that somebody, a cop or somebody else, would just label him a psychopath would be objectionable to begin with. And the judge said as much. He said, I don't think I need an order as the rule applies, that they are rules, which means they will be followed. So in other words, there's a rule that we don't label people and we don't just name call. I'm not going to make an order on top of that. And plus, if they did, it would be irrelevant. But interestingly, so those words are out. But the word murderer in references to him are in. And the reason for that is that this is a murder case. So at some point, you can imagine that someone might refer to the defendant in the context of calling him a murderer if the entire case is about the prosecution believing that he committed murder, if you can follow that in its infinite kind of silliness. And if we got questions, Kaylin, if you just want to throw them up, because I'm just kind of jabbering on. So if there's stuff that comes up along the way, please let me know. Okay. The next ruling, here we go. Dana Morrison says, why does he wear street clothes at the hearings? I thought the whole argument to wear street clothes was so that the jury wouldn't know that he is in custody, but the jury isn't there. This is a great question, and it's also a question that I have asked many times because I don't get it. It is very common, across the board type common, for a defendant to be dressed in civilian clothes, in a suit and tie, when they're on trial. The reason for that is the jury's going to be in the room, and we don't want the jurors to immediately be making assumptions about the defendant because a person who's dressed in counties it looks like they're guilty, so therefore they must be guilty. Makes absolute sense. Nobody ever argues with that. But usually for all of these hearings and everything else, the person comes out in their county jumpsuit. And that is for security reasons and the logistics of court and everything else. We don't want to dress someone out just every time they have to go in for a calendar hearing. They made a motion early on to say, no, we want him dressed out. And I think what that shows more than anything else is the incredible sensitivity to the media attention in this case coming from the defendant, from the attorneys in this case, and it's particular on the defense side. Remember, they moved this case out of Moscow all the way to Boise, several hours away, for the mere media attention that it was receiving. So they're very conscientious of that, and they're hoping that somehow this will have some positive effect on potential jurors, that they never see him in a county jumpsuit, that they only see him dressed in a tie. Anyhow, great question. Thank you, Dana. The next issue that was brought up was whether or not his family would be present. So this all came out of the idea that in most trials, there is a motion to exclude all potential witnesses from attending the trial until after they testify. And the reason for that is kind of, you can understand, we don't want somebody who's going to testify hearing prior testimony and perhaps allowing that to affect them, or perhaps, adapting their testimony based on how somebody else testified. By the way, do you guys like this new shirt? These are some of the new shirts that we're planning on putting on our merch store. And I just really love this color. So if you guys like it, let me know. Coming soon to a Courtroom Confidential shop near you. The prosecution has indicated that they expect to call several of his family members, and the defense, in kind of, which is becoming par for the course for them, kind of lit their hairs on fire and said, you can't do this, that you can't preclude them from being here. And they made the argument that for the humanity of the family, they can't do this. They have to travel across the country. There's a great expense to them. They want to be able to be here and support their family member, and they don't want to testify for the prosecution and everything else. And the judge, interestingly, didn't seem to dismiss this out of hand, because usually I would feel the judge would go, listen, the prosecution's allowed to call whoever they want to call. And it's unfortunate, but if that happens to be the family members of the defendant, I'm not going to make exceptions to this exclusionary rule and have them sitting in court when that could affect their testimony. But the judge did not give a ruling on this, but did make this comment. I can only imagine that the family of Mr. Kohberger is devastated by these things. It's nothing they did. And their ability to be here to see the trial is important. That's exactly the kind of stuff you want to hear out of a judge. And that's why I really, really am beginning to like this judge a lot, Judge Hippler. It's 100% true. These people didn't do anything. These people are, they're going through a nightmare as well. I'm not trying to make comparisons. I'm not trying to say that they're what they're going through is equal to or at the same as what the victims' families are going through. Nobody is saying that. But these people have had their lives turned upside down in a tremendous way as well. And they didn't do anything wrong here. And he's saying, I can understand what they're going through. They're devastated. They're devastated for what it's done to their family. They're devastated to see their child probably getting shipped off to prison for the rest of his life. And their ability to be here is important. And so he's not going to make a ruling just yet, but I did just want to highlight that as being appreciative of what a very balanced judge looks like. Afton says, why does Ann Taylor try to preclude a witness because she objects to part of his testimony? I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there, Afton, and I apologize because I feel like I want to answer this question, but preclude a witness because she objects to part of his testimony. I'm not quite sure. And I apologize because I want to be able to answer your questions. So that's where the judge left it. The judge did not give a ruling on that. We'll probably issue some sort of tailored ruling that they, as long as they're not percipient witnesses to something, then they're going to be allowed to sit during certain parts of testimony. Jason Lee says, does the ratio of circumstantial evidence to direct evidence become a factor in deciding if the death penalty is appropriate? Yeah, it is actually. Strangely enough, I mean, you can consider there's kind of a catch-all category of things like the strength of the case. And, listen, they've already decided guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But also, if they feel like it's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, they can consider, we believe they're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but this wasn't something that there was an eyewitness to, and maybe we don't want to give the greatest penalty in the world to that person. It's a much more loosey-goosey, touchy-feely type of affair when you get to the penalty part of a trial. But thank you for asking that, Jesse. Next thing the judge considered was the idea of third-party culpability. The judge is going to set this for a later date, and this is going to be a huge part of this case. If you've been following the Karen Reed trial, you know exactly what this is all about. This is about, can they bring up other suspects, and can they point to other people, and can they name other people, and not just other, there was the general population at large had an opportunity, but this person X had an opportunity. Why didn't you investigate that person? And what the prosecution was concerned with was that the defense would be using what they called a shotgun approach, meaning here's a bunch of people you didn't look into. Why didn't you do any of that? And that's not appropriate for third-party culpability. And the defense said, we're not going to do that. And the judge said, I don't care what any of you say. We're going to have a hearing on this thing and actually make a decision about it. The defense can always talk about the myopic behavior of the investigation, and they can always say, you guys only looked at my client and you never looked at anybody else, did you? But if you want to start then pointing the finger, please put Afton's question back up. Sorry, Kaylin. But if you want to start pointing the finger at other people, you better have some evidence to back that up before I'm going to allow you to do that. Sorry, Kaylin. Afton says, Taylor said she didn't want the state's phone expert to testify because she only objected to something specific in the discovery material. Afton, I know you're trying and I'm trying too. I mean, I guess what I can generally say is that that's where we're at in this trial, is we're at the point of them trying to get down to the nitty gritty of even people who can and cannot testify. Thank you. Yes, that's exactly what I want you to do. And I want you to leave me a voice message about it for Sunday Funday. But we're at that point where we've got now all the witness lists. We know the potential of people who are going to testify. And they're going through it. Both sides are saying, you can't, what's the offer of proof on that person? I don't want that person testifying. This person's irrelevant. That person's not qualified. This person, shouldn't be allowed to testify. So that's, I think, hopefully somewhat of an answer, Afton, but I don't think it's a good enough answer. So I think you should leave us a voice message to ask that question. And we'll be talking more about Sunday Funday. So don't you guys leave. Sunday Funday, by the way, happening again this Sunday. Leave us a message at thecourtroomconfidential.com and we will answer them live on Sunday. Then moving on to the DNA under fingernails. So the prosecution has said that some unidentified DNA, and there was another term that they used for it, but it was basically saying DNA that they could not match was found under the fingernails of one of the victims, Madison Mogen. And they have now said that even though the proper way of kind of clarifying it is not to say that, is to say that they were unable to determine who it goes to. They are not going to make the argument. The long story short being, they're not going to make the argument that it's Bryan Kohberger's. There's no evidence to really support that, and they're not going to try to do that in some backhanded way and say that it could be his even. And in fact, they're almost going along with the argument that it probably most likely is not his. And they believe that that's corroborated by the surviving witnesses' description of a person who was in the home being fully clothed, that there was no signs of a struggle. And they based that off of two things that I thought was really interesting. One, intoxication. And I think what they're getting with here is that at the time that these murders took place, at least some of the victims were so intoxicated that they may believe that they didn't even react or certainly didn't fight back, which is interesting to me because that's starting to give us an idea into what the murders were actually like. And if they're referencing toxicity levels for why they didn't expect there to be any DNA under the fingernails of the victim, that to me, believe at least you can start to, perhaps jump or step to conclusions that that's because they believe the person didn't react before they died based upon their level of intoxication. And they don't believe that there's any sign of defensive wounds, which is also an interesting thing to me because defensive wounds are usually what we describe being on I guess it's both. The defendant or the victim protecting themselves. So another indication that they didn't react, at least Madison didn't, or even on the defendant from her clawing or trying to stop this person. So long story short, it sounds like where they were going with this is we're not even going with the fingernails. We're not trying to prove anything with that. And if you want to try to read more between the lines, it may be that they were just fully unconscious through intoxication at the time that these stabbings took place. And then finally, one more thing on this DNA is the judge said that he's not going to ban the use of the phrase touch DNA, which is something that the defense was asking for. Again, just kind of getting down to some nitpicky stuff on the part of the defense, but they didn't like that phrase touch DNA. Moving on to the 911 call. The callers, the surviving roommates have now been named in reporting. And the defense is making the argument, and it's Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk. The defense is making the argument that the 911 call should not come in because, one, it's unreliable because of their level of intoxication. That two, it's hearsay, which is interesting because hearsay means an out-of-court expression being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. You learn this like it gets tattooed on your brain when you're in law school. What does that mean? It means hearsay isn't just something somebody else said. It only becomes hearsay if you're trying to prove the truth of what somebody else said. So in other words, if one of these young ladies is making a comment on the 911 call, something like, she's not breathing. Okay. In response to them asking about the conditions, the 911 operator asking about the conditions of the victims. Well, the prosecution is not offering that to prove that the victim was not breathing. In other words, they're offering it to prove any number of other things. What was the perception of the caller at that time? What was their present sense impression? Was this a, are they perceiving things in real time and explaining that to a caller? All of which can be exceptions to the hearsay rule. I'm kind of getting into the weeds on all of this, but the judge kind of felt the same way, that some of this could be hearsay because it's not quote unquote excited utterance exceptions. That's another exception to the hearsay rule, meaning you can get an out-of-court statement made if it was said under kind of the stress of excitement, meaning I just witnessed something and I said, oh my God, he just shot her. That could come in because it's a excited utterance. But the other interesting thing that came out of all of this, so everyone who calls 911 and is intoxicated is hearsay. No, it's the separate issues, but people who call 911 are making out-of-court statements. And if you're trying to prove something through those out-of-court statements, you're offering them for their truth, that can be hearsay. But they're saying, one, they're intoxicated, therefore they're unreliable, and two, they part of this is hearsay. The judge said maybe some of it will be hearsay. Anyways, the interesting point of all of this I wanted to get to was that they said that the girls, Dylan and Bethany, were not just doing nothing during the period between when the murders allegedly took place and when they called 911, which was several hours, 8 hours or so. They said they were in fact doing things, that they have evidence that they were editing photos on their phones, using Snapchat, and calling family members. And this was interesting to me, because this gives us a little bit more glimpse as to what was the reaction and what were they doing in that home after this incredibly troubling thing that took place, which was they thought they saw a stranger in the home, and they both, we saw the text messages where they're all kind of panicked and saying, run to my room. Well, I imagine the defense is going to say things like, you weren't panicked. You weren't scared. You were sitting on your phone, editing photos, playing on Snapchat, and calling family members. You weren't all that worried for these hours that took place in between. Will that mean that the 911 doesn't come in though? I don't think so. I think this 911 is definitely coming in. It's just a matter of how nitpicky the judge wants to get about any hearsay that may be involved in it. But quite honestly, if you're the defense, I'm wondering why are you picking this fight anyways? How does this really hurt or help your client, whether or not this 911 call comes in? If you've heard it, it's not like we're hearing anything in there that's such a linchpin in this case. So I don't get it. All right, we've got a few more things here to move on to. Next was alibi. Cy Ray made his first appearance, not first appearance, but Cy Ray made an appearance in these arguments. The judge saying this is the defense. I'm going to call him telephone expert. He's the person who's, going to help them with the kind of triangulation calculations and understanding of the cell phone data as to where Bryan Kohberger was and when. And the prosecution has been making the argument that, listen, you guys keep on saying you have an alibi. You haven't presented us with anything. You haven't said where he is and how you're going to prove that during the times of the murders. The judge said, interestingly, that Mr. Cy Ray actually could offer what he calls a partial corroboration, because he can apparently say where Bryan Kohberger was before and after. I don't know if we exactly call that alibi. Alibi to me means I was somewhere else when these murders take place, and Cy Ray is not going to testify to that, because everything the prosecution has been saying, and the defense has not been disputing this, is that his phone was off, and so no one knows where he was. during the time of the murders, or at least where his cell phone was during the time of the murders, or at least not through the evidence dealing with the cell phones. Do they know where he was? So I don't know how this is actually is partial corroboration of an alibi, but whatever. But then the judge did come after the defense, and this has to do with that Cy Ray affidavit where they made some serious allegations about whether or not the prosecution had turned over certain items. This is from the judge's own mouth. The judge said, you've made some serious allegations against the state about hiding evidence, yet you've provided no evidence, zero. Where that will go, we don't know. But to me, that is a judge not too happy with allegations being made that don't entirely seem to be supported. We'll see where that goes, because there was some very serious allegations made by Cy Ray that seem to be backed up with the receipts. But now the judge is saying, I don't see the receipts. So we'll see where that goes. And no decision has been made on that either. Body cam of the traffic stop. We've all seen this body cam where he was stopped for a traffic violation. The defense has said, we don't want it coming in because it's prior bad acts. And I thought to myself, this has got to be the most ridiculous kind of application of prior bad acts if you're trying to say that somebody who commits a traffic violation is a bad person and therefore could have committed murder. I don't know if I don't want to be mischaracterizing their argument here, but that was the part of the arguments made. The prosecution saying, no, this is the traffic stop I think that we're talking about. This was before the murders. The prosecution saying, no, we want to show that he's got the Hyundai. You see the little Hyundai symbol there. We want to show he's in possession of that vehicle. That's exactly what we want to bring this in for. The judge says he'll take a look at the video. I don't know why he needs to look at it. I think it's kind of self-explanatory why they want to use it and why the defense wants it kept out. Again, I don't really know why the defense wants it kept out, other than they maybe just don't want anything the prosecution wants in, and good for them if they want to fight everything. All right. And then finally, the real kind of meat and potatoes here was the Amazon purchases. As everybody knows now, unless you're under that true crime rock, that over the last couple of weeks, we have learned that the prosecution now has evidence of Bryan Kohberger's Amazon purchases, and that they expect to be able to prove that 8 months before the murders took place, he purchased a K-bar knife, a sheath. Are we allowed to show the knife? Are we getting in trouble for even showing the knife? No, I think I can't hold the knife. That's what we've been told on Amazon or on YouTube. So I'm not holding this knife. This is a picture of a knife. That he purchased the knife, a sheath, and a sharpener. And that he also searched for those similar items after the murders took place. And their argument likely going to be, well, he lost a sheath and now he's trying to replace it. Or he disposed of a knife and now he's trying to replace it to not arouse suspicion, I imagine, is where they're going with all of that. The defense's argument on all of this is that this was accessed by multiple people, this account, which a lot of Amazon accounts are. As I know personally, when I see purchases on my Amazon account that are, princess rainbow castle sets or something, I'm like, I know that wasn't my purchase. That was likely for somebody else in our household. But the judge's final comment on this, though not, again, making entirely a ruling on the admissibility of it, he brought up something interesting that I didn't know, and this has to do with, foundationally, the question is, can the prosecution match these purchases to Bryan Kohberger, right? They have to somehow, if it was a shared account, be able to say this is a Bryan Kohberger purchase. Otherwise, it might become more prejudicial than probative. The judge says that account also tracked the shipping of the item, which I have not heard before now. So that was interesting to me, because now it may be beyond just purchasing information, but they can say that was shipped to a location that we know him to be at on a date and delivered on a date that we know him to have been the recipient of said knife, sheath, and sharpener. So there's kind of the highlights. Still more to come in Bryan Kohberger. And like I said, next Wednesday, Kevin Fixler will be back with us to discuss all of the rest of Bryan Kohberger. So we'll be doing all things Bryan Kohberger. Did I miss any questions? I think I did. Should we try to get to some of those? Afton says, were they saying everyone in the house purchases through the same email? I don't think they've gotten that specific, but what I think they're saying is this is one of those kind of family accounts where everybody was, maybe logging on to the same Amazon account, perhaps connected to the same credit card or what have you, and having items delivered. That's the other good question is we don't know where these were delivered to. Were they delivered to Pennsylvania? We heard about him making purchases at a Dick's in Philadelphia. He's living in Washington. We don't know where these items were going to. I mean, obviously, if the Amazon purchase on a shared account is having items delivered to Washington and he's the only one living there, it's probably not going to be a difficult argument for the prosecution. Off the White Lotus says, if Bryan Kohberger's sister and father are testifying, who pays for their travel and lodging expenses? If they're a witness of the prosecution will handle it. The prosecution has to accommodate their own witnesses, and if they become a witness for them, then they'll accommodate that. Now, they'll probably only accommodate it for the time of their testifying, and so they'll need to pick up the tab for the rest of the time that they're there. But interesting question the off-white lotus. I said it wrong to begin with. The off-white lotus. All right. Anything else that I missed here? Great questions, you guys. Such a great show tonight. Just some quick announcements. Okay. First of all, like I said, if you missed it and if you're interested in Bryan Kohberger, which it sounds like you all are, we did a case notes. This is the thumbnail you should be looking for. Very proud of this. Kaylin did amazing work. We sat down with Kevin Fixler and we did about as deep a dive into this case as we could. And we tried to be as accurate and objective as we could. And we hope that you guys enjoy it. And it's getting a lot of positive feedback on the channel. So please check it out. Next, Sunday Fun Day coming up this Sunday. Can I share something, Kaylin? Where do I go, Josh? I so desperately want to leave a voice message. Well, you go to thecourtroomconfidential.com and you click on this tab right here. Why am I having trouble with it? You click on this tab right here, send a voice message. This little box will pop up and you click on start recording and you leave a voice message. And we've received some amazing messages from all of you. And we're so thankful. And we hope that we hear from all of you again. Alicia K. Mayo says, weekly Sunday Fun Day, Joshua. That's right. And I expect my weekly Sunday Fun Day question from Alicia K. Mayo that just warms my heart. So please join us this Sunday. Leave us a message. We will keep doing this for as long as we get the messages from you guys. Coming up on Monday is I'm going to do my homework. Okay, Afton, I appreciate that. Don't make me work too hard though. Oh, IGG Rock says my birthday is Sunday. Well, happy birthday. And if you show up Sunday, we will all sing you happy birthday. So thank you, IGG Rocks. Hope to see you then. And happy early birthday. This Monday, the following this Sunday on Monday, we have our newest episode in our Courtroom Confidential Conversation series. And we sat down with Esther from the very popular podcast, Once Upon a Crime. And she is an OG podcast host for true crime. She's been doing this for a long time. Got some great stories about what it was like in those early days of true crime podcasting. And we had a really great conversation and we think you guys will enjoy it. So please join us on Monday as well. We have a lot of new members and I want to thank all of you because if you guys took the time to join our membership, then I'm going to take the time to thank you. And just again, so you know where to go to find out about joining our membership, please go to thecourtroomconfidential.com and click on Become a Member. and it will shoot you over to the Join the Crew page where you can find about all the benefits that we have of membership. And the people who decided to do that were Melissa Rodriguez, Jennifer Greeno, Deanie Mullis Diver, Baca, Gossip Rumor and Innuendo, Texas Mom, Carlene, Evangeline Light, Special K, Selena K, Kelly P, Be Free, D Oracle, Susie, Laura Wright, Misty Peterson, Sloth Tilica, Lois Cox, Kathy Davidson, and Second Beach Gal. Also, uniquely Susie, retired hospice RN, Jen L. Rodriguez, Enchanted Paws, Curious Nonsense, Britt Black, April Betts, Jaguar RN on one, Northwest, David Abe, Some Rando, Mandy Strong, Miss CC, LJ, Leela Jones, Lady Die 2, Keena Gray, Carol Woodward, Kimmy R, Dandy Linus, and The Sweet. Thank you guys. I can't believe the outpouring of support from everybody. So thank you so much. You're all fantastic. I'll talk to you about the new merch that we got coming out soon as we get that up. Thank you guys for joining us on a Sunday or on a Wednesday evening. Hope you all enjoyed that. And please tune in again soon where we'll get into more of all of this good stuff. Thank you guys again. Have a great night.